Hey y'all, my name is Gabrielle and welcome back to Gabrielle's Guide to Books. So one of my guilty pleasures when I only have a few minutes and I'm scrolling the internet and I want to look at book related content, I typically search for videos that say something to the order of books that changed my brain chemistry or books that completely changed my perspective. I just really like to know the books that completely upended people's worldview, shaped their worldview, and I realized I've never done that on this channel. There is no way that I could tell you every single book that has completely shaped or reshaped my worldview, but these were some of the books that, when talking with a friend recently about this question, immediately came to mind for me and also were easy to pull off my bookshelf. If you like Black bookish content, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and give this video a big thumbs up.
Even on the bad days, I thank God for making me brave, 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 brave.
The first book is The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton. I need to take a deep breath before talking about this book. I remember taking a very deep breath through my tears after reading this book. I initially wanted to read this book because my dear friend Oprah Winfrey told me to do so. And when my dear friend Oprah Winfrey tells me to read a book, a Black book, I usually do read that book. So anyway, and especially at this time because I was really into the Oprah Book Club at this time. I read this book in 2018, and when I tell you, this book really did change my life in a lot of different ways. So let me just give you a quick synopsis of this book. In 1985, Anthony Ray Hinton was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder in Alabama. Stunned and confused and only 29 years old, Hinton knew it was a case of mistaken identity and believed that the truth would prove his innocence and ultimately set him free. But with no money and a different system of justice for a poor Black man in the South, Hinton was sentenced to death by electrocution. He spent his first 3 years on death row at Hallman State Prison in agonizing silence, full of despair and anger towards all those who had sent an innocent man to his death. But as Hinton realized and accepted his fate, he resolved not only to survive, but to find a way to live on death row. For the next 27 years, he was a beacon, transforming his own spirit of those of his fellow inmates, 54 of whom were executed mere feet from his cell. He founded a prison book club, which helped its members to talk about their own lives, regrets, and ideas. With the help of Bryan Stevenson, civil rights attorney and best-selling author of Just Mercy, Hinton won his release in 2015. So this book came out in 2018. Well, it's when I read it, and I would have probably read this book right when it came out. The story of Anthony Ray Hinton is incredible to me, and it was intriguing, like I said, because Oprah said to read it. Bryan Stevenson is my intellectual crush, so I had already read Just Mercy by the time that this book had come out and had already fallen in love with Bryan Stevenson and just the wonderful work that he was doing then and has now expanded to do and has now included the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. Anyway, back to this book. So one of the other things that really intrigued me is because one of the crimes that Mr. Hinton was falsely accused of happened in my hometown. And this definitely was something that happened even before I was born, but he describes one of the crimes happening at a place that I remember going to as a child in my hometown. And so that was already sort of a point of familiarity. Then just reading the story of how he was falsely accused, how the evidence didn't even really match up. And the story just like it was clear as day, but because of the justice system, learning about the ways in which men would be in like solitary confinement and not speaking to another human being for years on end, and also how he created and began this book club. I usually have a lot of words to say about a book and the themes and all of those types of things with a book, but what I will say is that this was a book that made me feel. And I've had books that made me feel something before, for sure, but the visceral feelings that I had while, during, and even after reading this book, like there are certain pieces of this book that when I think about it, it brings me back to the scenes in this book. This book made me feel angry, it made me feel confused, it made me feel sad, it made me feel full of rage and paranoid and numb, mad, furious. So just such a range of emotions. But also this book made me feel very hopeful, because one of the things that you'll learn through this book is just really the intense spirit of Mr. Hinton throughout these almost 30 years that he was in prison. And not only just in prison, but on death row. So there are particular parts of the book that also, when I say hopeful, that just made, like, I would say my heart smile a bit. It was definitely the book club that was mentioned in the blurb. It was the relationship between Anthony Ray Hinton and Bryan Stevenson, the remembrances that Mr. Hinton would talk about with his mother, with his friends, and the intense relationships that they had. Mostly, I would say this book had me feel just such a sense of sadness about what could happen to a Black man in this country, and an innocent Black man in this country, and just the ways in which at this time it was a lot about the deaths and murders of Black men at the hands of law enforcement, and there were lives that were taken away like in an instant. And reflecting on someone like Mr. Hinton, where his life was taken away, but he had to live with that and live with, okay, is today the day that this is today my last day? And he had to live with that for 30 years, and knowing that he was innocent, and just thinking about how many Black men before him, during his time and after his time, will be in these similar situations because of the justice system. And the fact that this is something that, yes, happened in 1985, but could easily happen today in 2026 is something that just stays with me. This makes me think about how much Black men have to carry with them as they just exist in this world. I think that this is a story that was definitely about the South, a story that was definitely about the Alabama justice system and the legal code and all of those types of things. But I think that this is truly an American story, and that this could happen anywhere. Following the release of this book, had the opportunity to hear Mr. Hinton speak, and his personality definitely came through in this book. But seeing his personality on stage, I was just in tears even listening to him speak, because I was thinking, like, what a gift that he met Bryan Stevenson and his relationship led to his eventual release. But those 30 years, what could this man have accomplished? He was denied so many things. He was denied access to his family, to build a family of his own. This book, this story stays with me. Since then, I have always donated yearly to Bryan Stevenson and his organizations and initiatives, and also it has really just changed the ways in which I think about the carceral state here in America. This book really, really changed my brain chemistry, my worldview, and I think that I am just a better person, a better citizen, a better human after having engaged with Mr. Hinton's story. So if you have not read this book, this is one that I would highly, highly recommend. It was definitely 5 stars for me, and I would encourage you to also pick it up if you have not read it before. Okay, so staying a little bit in the nonfiction category, this book, No Disrespect by Sister Soldier. If people ask me to tell them my top 5 favorite books, this is always going to be on the list. I don't care how many books I've read. So let me just read a little bit of the description of it. Rapper, activist, and hip hop rebel, Sister Soldier possesses the most passionate and articulate voice to emerge from the projects. Now she uses that unmistakable voice to deliver what is at once a fiercely candid autobiography and a survival manual for any African American woman who wants to keep her heart open and her integrity intact in the 1990s America. Every chapter of No Disrespect is devoted to someone who made a difference in Sister Soldier's life, from the mother who raised her to the men who educated and miseducated her about love, and each bears a controversial truth about the Black condition in America, this disintegration of families, the unremitting combat between the sexes, and the 1,001 ways in which racism continues to circumscribe the ways African American people see themselves and treat one another. The result is an outspoken and often outrageous rejoinder to the pieties of race, class, and gender by a writer who can be wise, bawdy, brutally funny, and as sensitive as a lightning rod in a thunderstorm. Each chapter of this book is dedicated to a particular person in Sister Soldier's life. So we get a chapter that is devoted to her mother, a chapter that is devoted to her father, a chapter that is devoted to men in her life, a chapter that is devoted to women that she's encountered. And so this is really about her childhood, but it goes into like her college years as well. This is the actual copy that I read when I was in my teenage years, and this is actually the one book that I remember my mother looking at and being like, girl, what is it that you're reading? She read the chapter, if you are familiar with this book, she read the chapter on Nikki. And Nikki was one of Sister Soldier's friends in college, and she was a sexually liberated young woman, and Sister Soldier was telling the story about Nikki. And my mom was just like, what is this that you are reading? And I get it because I was a teenager, but also too, I needed to know that story before I went to college, because I recognized a lot of Nikki's that I went to college with, and a lot of tendencies that I was just like, you know what? I need to get some of Nikki in my life. This was the first time that I really saw like a real raw, non-fiction, non-TV depiction of Black men and young Black men and young Black women in relationship with one another, and how class and race and racism and just society were such sort of a silent partner in those relationships, that it couldn't just exist to be the love between these two people. It was also colorism that was brought in, class and sexuality. There were just so many things that were brought into this situation. I was also trying to grapple with what is the place of Black women, Black people in America, in a society. And this book was really taking place in the 1990s, but I definitely read this book probably in the early 2000s. Yeah, very early 2000s. And so it was like a reflection of like a different world than what I was seeing like necessarily on TV. It was so raw, it was so real, and I felt like it was written for me. And it was something, honestly, after having read The Coldest Winter Ever, I really felt like, okay, Sister Soldier is a writer that I feel like can relate to me. And I can't remember whether this came out before The Coldest Winter Ever or not, but I remember reading this one second. Sister Soldier was always on TV, and she was always like getting white people told in like the most eloquent of ways. And I just really respected that in her. And then to have this book that I just felt like was telling me about a world that I wasn't seeing in my small town neighborhood. It wasn't something at the time that was really able to be discussed on TV, or at least the things that I could watch. But I felt like I had unfiltered access to books until my mama read the Nikki chapter. But it was already too late because I had read the Nikki chapter. Like, I was so into this book that I remember I had two boyfriends that at the time, all we could do is like, if they came over to the house to see me, all we could do is sit in the living room. And so I was like, well, let's do something together. And we would read this book aloud to one another. I was like addicted to this book. So yeah, shout out to Will and Chris, who both read this book with me. So yeah, altered my brain chemistry when I read it. Okay, yeah, anyway, I'm getting myself excited about this book all over again because it really did have a really interesting place in my life. But again, to me, this book is still timely, but I would recommend. And the next book is The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. Every single one of the women in The Women of Brewster Place were different, had different upbringings, different reasons for being in Brewster Place, but still had this sense of community. And it just taught me just about so many different experiences of Black women being in the same place but experiencing the world completely different. This book is a classic, and Gloria Naylor, she just doesn't get the due that I probably talked about Gloria Naylor books before on this channel, and I'm sure every time I've talked about them, I've said Gloria Naylor does not get the due that she deserves, because I just don't think that she does. She's okay. So it says, Brewster Place, a blind alley feeding into a dead end, a street few would move to by choice. Through the fractured perspectives of 7 women who occupy this common ground, this remarkable work of fiction evokes intimately and powerfully the world of Black women today. Hard-edged, soft-centered, beautifully demanding, and easily pleased, these women experience, fight against, and sometimes transcend a world where compassionate energy is at war with the implacable desolation. With The Women of Brewster's Place, Gloria Naylor brings a new and distinctive voice to contemporary American fiction. Completely agree. I completely agree. This book was amazing. And just the ways in which these women's stories intersected. And I know that this was made into either a movie or a mini series, and it just really taught me that, like, you can still have community with people that are not like you. When you want to say Black women are not a monolith, there's so many books that are about women in friendship, but I think that these are women that, if they had different circumstances, they would not have been in community with one another, and just showing how place is really important in bringing these women together. Black women are not a monolith. Getting these different stories about just the different things also that can happen to women, to Black women throughout their lives. This was just a powerful book. I think about these women in this book all the time. I'll be talking about the women of Brewster, like some of the characters in the Women of Brewster Place, like they are women that, like, I know in real life, and then I have to be like, oh, actually she was a character in the Women of Brewster Place. So yeah, this book is just one of those books that made me just know that Gloria Naylor was a powerhouse of a writer, but that also I think this was one of those books that, reading it early on, I'm sure I read it probably in college or as a teenager, I knew that books about the relationships between Black women were going to be my jam. And I mean, look at me today. The next book that I will talk about is White Rage by Dr. Carol Anderson. I think this book was written in like maybe 2016. So this book is probably 10 years old now. Yep. It was written in 2016. It's 10 years old. As Ferguson, Missouri erupted in August 2014, with media commentators referring to the angry response of African Americans yet again as Black Rage, historian Carol Anderson writes a remarkable op-ed in the Washington Post showing that this was indeed white rage at work. With so much attention on the flames, she writes, everyone has ignored the kindling. Now, in her eloquent and powerfully argued narrative, Anderson makes clear that since 1865 and the passage of the 13th Amendment, every time African Americans have made advancements towards full participation in our democracy, white reaction, usually in the courts and legislature, have fueled a deliberate and relentless rollback of their gains. So it goes on, but one of the things that I will say is that this book gave me language for the moment. I think this book gave me language for 2016, the emergence of Black Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter movement, but it has been language that I've continued to use today. One of the things that I really like about this, even though in her op-ed for the Washington Post in 2016, Dr. Anderson writes about this moment as being white rage, and it's white rage towards Black progress. This book went much deeper and mapped that from 1865 to the rise and presidency of President Barack Obama. And so it was just talking about at every point that Black excellence could be seen publicly, could be seen out loud. There was a considerable backlash. We call it, the justice system and all of these types of things, but it is really, as she so eloquently puts it, white rage. And that white rage is spurred from Black progress. And just like sometimes my brain chemistry is changed because like I now have the language for a thing. And I think when framed like, where does this racism come from? And saying racism is a really light way to put things. But then when you say something like white rage or rage, that really gives a different connotation to it. So if you have not read the op-ed piece, if you have not read White Rage, and Dr. Anderson has come out with several books after this, and a lot of her books are around, voting, but I think that this one, White Rage, was really one that we needed in the moment that it came out, and we needed for every single moment after it. And if you have not read it, I would highly, highly recommend it. Even though this book is 10 years old, it is so, so relevant, even in 2026. Not much has changed. Sadly, not much has changed. But yeah, pick this one up if you haven't read it already. The next book that I'll talk about is When and Where I Enter by Paula Giddings. This book really changed and helped me with understanding Black women's place in history, and especially in like in the history of social movements, because I think so much of these histories about the civil rights movement, social movements, those type of things really focus on the actions and male leaders, and often leaves out the organization and organizing of Black women. But this book, I remember when reading it, I had to be in college, I guess. When I read it, I was like, woo, yes. But let me read the blurb. When and Where I Enter is an eloquent testimonial to the profound influences of African American women on race and women's movements throughout American history. Drawing on speeches, diaries, letters, and other original documents, Paula Giddings powerfully portrays how Black women have transcended racist and sexist attitudes, often confronting white feminists and Black male leaders alike to initiate social and political reform. From the open disregard for the rights of enslaved women to examples of today's more covert racism and sexism in civil rights and women's organizations, Giddens illuminates the Black women's crusade for equality. In the process, she paints unforgettable portraits of Black female leaders such as anti-lynching activist Ida B. Wells, educator and FDR advisor Mary McLeod Bethune, and the heroic civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer, among others, who fought both overt and institutional oppression. It was like I knew how Black women organized, and I knew that inherently. And I think, even in church, I think that was sort of one of the first places that I noticed it. I was like, well, all the leaders are men, but the women are really running the things and doing all the things for the church. Well, why does the man get to be the leader? Even thinking about like Black history, some of the inherent sexism and often even classism that is in there that leaves women, particularly poor Southern women, out of the movement and out of the narrative of the movement, of the stories. And this was one that really placed these Black women at the forefront. And I was just like, yes, 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 give me more of this book. I don't want to make it seem like it's so dramatic, but this book, I think, definitely changed the history of like my academic life and academic career, because I became very interested in Black women's organizing and Black women, particularly Black club women, through these organizations where people thought, oh, they're just having tea. Or it's a club, and it's like, oh no, Black women are doing Black women's organizing is different than white women's organizing. They're just not sipping tea. They were like, okay, we'll sip this tea, we'll eat these bonbons, and we're also going to do this organizing because we need to change things. We're not waiting for the men to change this. We are doing it for ourselves, because when and where I entered, and that's word to Anna Julia Cooper. Okay. Anyway, if you want a primer on Black women and organizing through social and civil rights movements, this is a great book for you to pick up. I would be remiss if I did not talk about this book in terms of finances, but this is the 21-Day Financial Fast by Michelle Singletary. So this is the financial fast. For 21 days, participants will put away their credit cards and buy only the barest essentials. With Michelle's guidance during this 3-week financial fast, you'll discover how to break bad financial habits, plot a course to become debt-free, learn how to prepare elderly relatives and yourself for long-term care, establish a life happens fund and stop worrying about money, and find the priceless power of financial peace. So if you don't remember, Michelle Singletary used to have a column called The Color of Money in the Washington Post. I think she does something on her own now, because I think that she no longer does that column anymore. This book really changed the way that I thought about money, because it was the first time that I had gone on a financial fast. The first time that I did this financial fast, it was in January of whatever year it was, and my best friend joined me, and I realized that like most of the things that I acquire, I don't really even need. And I will say that Michelle Singletary does this through like a biblical lens. So if this is something that might be interested for you, just know that she does use the Bible as a way to ground this book and the concepts of financial peace. But outside of that, I would just say that this led me to a life-changing experiment. I was like challenging myself to even when thinking about the barest essentials like groceries and those types of things, I was like, how can I get this, like, my total down every week? So I was just like trying my best to like spend less money on groceries every week. I mean, it's so impossible kind of to do that in the same way today. But I found some of my best and favorite recipes during this time. I realized, like, girl, you don't really need all of this stuff. And this is something that I think is a yearly fast, at least a once yearly fast, that everyone should try to do for 3 weeks. You can likely give up buying things and realize like how much money you save and just like how much financial peace you have. I know that since I have pulled back on buying things from Amazon, or now I sit on like any purchase over $100, at least 24 hours, I buy way less things. And so I think the root of it was just really this book. I am really into personal finance. I've read a lot of personal finance books and heard a lot of personal finance advice. But when I think back to what was something that like really, really changed me, particularly in the financial space, it was definitely this book by Michelle Singletary. This book is A Black Woman's History of the United States by Dr. Dana Berry and Dr. Callie Gross. This book is so necessary for all the reasons I mentioned in the discussion of when and where I enter. But this was a time to see all of these Black women's like stories and history sort of in one place, and the remarkable ways in which Black women have shaped the history of the United States of America. So let me just give you a quick rundown of this. It's long, I won't read it, the whole thing, but it says, a Black woman's history of the United States reaches far beyond a single narrative to showcase Black women's lives in all their fraught complexities. Berry and Gross prioritize many voices: enslaved women, freed women, religious leaders, artists, queer women, activists, and women who lived outside the law. The result is a starting point for exploring Black women's history as a testament to the beauty, richness, rhythm, joy, tragedy, heartbreak, rage, and enduring love that abounds in the spirit of Black women in communities throughout the nation. I think that this book is really great. I think this is a really great, this was, to me, that like that time where all of these histories were together. I wish the book was longer. As you can see, it's really not that long. I mean, there was just, they couldn't tell every story, so they sort of did these vignettes through the book. Sorry, y'all, that this last clip might have got cut off because my SD card started screaming at me that I only have 3 more minutes left on this SD card. So unfortunately, I will not get to all of the books that I had for you all. So you only really got one fiction book out of that. Anyway, I will have to clear out this SD card and then do a part 2 to this video. So I've told you all this is like my favorite sort of bookish type of content. So please do tell me in the comments, what were the books that changed your brain chemistry, your mindset, just completely upended the way that you thought about yourself and you thought about the world. Tell me if you've read any of these books. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. But until next time, take care of yourself and stay glowing. Bye, y'all.
I can't help but think that there is something more to find, more to life than what I have right here, right now. Used to call it stable, now I